Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that for very good reason the first plenary this morning went a little bit over time. We'll make an effort to catch up, I expect, by eating a little bit into the coffee break time. So this session will run till about 11:15 or so, I anticipate. But it won't run until 11:30 if we're able to start now. But in order to start now, I'd invite those of you who are wandering about to find your seats again. And those of you who have begun conversations to briskly end them. Thank you very much. So the fifth plenary session is on the theme preventing conflict in contested domains, and those were very carefully chosen words because, as we heard this morning, there are different and competing claims of sovereignty that affect the international relations of the Asia-Pacific, and there is a determination of the countries in this region to avoid at least the worst kind of conflict as they have their differences of opinion on matters of territory or the like. And we're really delighted again to have three full ministers of defense addressing this plenary. We have General Zo Xuan Lich, the Minister of National Defense of Vietnam. Vietnam has been a strong supporter and active participant in Shangri-La Dialogue over the years. It's a delight again to welcome to this stage General Retired Delfin Lorenzana, Secretary of National Defense of the Philippines, a good friend of the Shangri-La Dialogue process. By the way, we hope to be holding a small workshop in Manila in September, and perhaps we'll see you again then, because IISS activities in the region are not confined to the Shangri-La Dialogue. We like to deploy ourselves intellectually in a number of other countries in the region. And it's a real pleasure to have here Senator Linda Reynolds, the Minister of Defense of Australia. She's been Minister of Defense for approximately 4 days, and 75% of her time as Minister of Defense has been in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue. But it's been well spent, as I know from her that she's had numerous meetings with her counterparts here, so she will be returning to Canberra with a spring in her step, I'm sure. So thank you very much to all three of you, and could I now invite General Go of Vietnam to address the fifth plenary session. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. John Chipman, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to IISS, the government, and Ministries of Defense of Singapore for the kind invitation for me to attend and share my thoughts with you at this SLD, Shangri-La Dialogue. So over 18 consecutive years, Shangri-La Dialogue has been able to validate its role, positive, prove its significance and gravity in the region and the wider world as a Tier 1 forum for dialogue in the region and global security, providing platform for participants to share viewpoints to find ways toward regional peace, stability, and prosperity. I'm appreciative that IISS has selected the theme for these plenary sessions as preventing conflict in contested domains. It represents both an urgent call and a fundamental requirement to narrow down differences, minimize the risk of conflict for peace, stability, prosperity in Asia-Pacific, so that these regions will become prosperous as we all aspire. Ladies and gentlemen, the panoramic landscape of security in the world and Asia-Pacific reveals to us that peace, cooperation, and development remain the mainstream and of common interest of various countries. However, we are also faced with security challenges and complexities, including strategic competition, especially the strategic rivalry among major powers. As Asia-Pacific ascends in its geopolitical importance and gravity, the strategic interest contest also becomes more and more intense. Fact is, competition is now unraveling with complexity and higher level globally and regionally, expanding to numerous domains ranging from politics, diplomacy, economy, trade, resources, environment, sovereignty, territorial integrity, including seas and islands, and cyberspace, national interest religions, to name just a few, involving both traditional and non-traditional issues. Causes to such a situation may root in swift changes in the dynamic and balance of power, differences in strategic interests, as well as mismatch between words and deeds, the behavior of power politics, the mentalities of might is right, the pursuit of selfish goals without any weight given to other legitimate interests, the negligence to the region and international common goods. Ladies and gentlemen, competition exists as a matter of fact, functioning as a drive for social development. It has been and will be in its own objective existence. Having said that, rivalry in a zero-sum game for capitulation purposes, vying for shelf gains, containing each other, shall surely lead to conflict or even war. These developments certainly embody significant risks and should not be neglected. In a globalized world with the stronger linkages and increased interdependence, conflict, if ever happened, would result in unpredictable consequences, affecting not only direct stakeholders, but also the region and the wider world. What matters the most is finding ways to handle competition. On the one hand, if countries having different interests learn to give a priority to maintaining an environment of peace, security, and stability on top of others, we could definitely work out the way to cooperate, close the gulf of differences, and settle disputes. On the other hand, if countries employ coercion, force, or threats of force for resolution, we would indeed broaden the divide, deepen disputes, fuel rivalry, and finally, inevitably give rise to conflict. On that note, it is important for us to work together for an early prevention of conflict, effective management of competing issues that may entail conflicts. The key is for parties to adhere to international law, respect national independence, sovereignty, and legitimate interests, withstand from the use of force or threats to use force, refrain from activities that could further complicate the situation, seek for alternatives and areas of cooperation for mutual benefits, to build confidence and trust, to step-by-step resolve differences and disputes. Surely, this is a long process that requires high-level political will, and we cannot afford a passive approach. Facing these complex security challenges, the behavior and actions taken by major powers have a vital role to play. Any inconsistency between words and actions, any act of irresponsibility by them can invite doubt and even uncertainty to smaller powers, serving to inflame the situation rather than cooling them, exacerbating the differences and escalations, confrontation into conflict. Given that, big powers must exercise bigger roles and bear bigger responsibility in regional affairs, setting good example in international relations. It is good to have concerned parties to come to table and talk with each other for peaceful resolution dispute. We should support and welcome more of the like. Ladies and gentlemen, As a country experiencing wars, plight, sufferings, and losses, so as to gain national liberation, independence, and freedom, and in some cases, not just for its own, but upon the core of international duty, we truly understand the value of peace. We always aspire to thrive in peace, stability, cooperation for co-development, and shared prosperity. Vietnam's national defense policy is aimed to safeguard its independence, sovereignty, national interest, to protect the country's peace, to resolve dispute via peaceful means in accordance with international law, to take positive and active role in international integration, to promote cooperation and relationship with countries in the world, to take part in protecting peace, stability, and security in the region and the world. Those guidelines could be summarized as solving disputes in peaceful atmosphere with the spirit of partnership for community responsibility. Over the years, Vietnam has spared no effort in working with regional and international community to build and implement cooperation mechanisms and projects, participating in multilateral fora, successfully organizing APEC and hosting the second US DPRK summit, among others. We will continue to make further endeavor in contributing regional multilateralism, promoting peace and reconciliation, and preventing conflict. In fact, this is our goal and duty as Vietnam assumes the ASEAN Chairmanship in 2020, which coincides with our candidacy for the non-permanent UN Security Council membership in the 2020-2021 term. Such spirit is reflected in Vietnam's policy, for which the Defense White Paper, among others, well captures our intent. Vietnam continues to affirm that our national defense is the self-defense in nature, the defense of peace. We also clearly point out the defense and security challenges facing us, make it clear as of our adjustment in strategy, leadership mechanism, force posture, management, apparatus, and our resources and capability in building all these capacity. Ladies and gentlemen, the IISS, also known as the South China Sea, is an area that harbors a wide range of dispute and strategic competition, from economy to military and diplomacy, and there are certain latent risks of conflict. With its vital geopolitical location and huge potential benefits, the IISS is where many countries place their national interests and goals in. But if we are bound to uphold the law and have a sufficient willingness, the IISS, or South China Sea, can surely be made of sea of peace, cooperation, and development. We highly value the progress made by parties in the negotiations of Code of Conduct of Party in the South China Sea, or COC. An early conclusion of a meaningful, substantive, abiding, and effective COC would contribute significantly to preserving peace, stability, freedom, security, and safety of navigation and overflight in the IISS. We really want is that concerned party and stakeholder inside, outside region to work to prevent risks and conflict. And we also work with other countries to promote dialogue and consultation, working out to determinedly pursuing the solution of dispute in the IISS by peaceful means on the basis of international law. His Excellency Mr. Nguyen Phu Trọng, General Secretary of Communist Party of Vietnam and State President of Vietnam, has eloquently pointed out Vietnam is determined and consistent in firmly defending its independent sovereignty, legitimate national interests in accordance with international law. The unwavering line of our policy is what involves two countries should be settled bilaterally, what involves many countries should be settled multilaterally, ensuring harmonization of stakeholder individual interests and the region commonly shared interests. In other words, it is to find ways to solve dispute and differences in the IISS while preserving the peaceful environment, the cooperative partnership attitude, and the commonly shared responsibility for community. That is agreed between us and General Wei Fenghua. We met and agreed that Vietnam and China have differences in the IISS issues, but maintaining peace and cooperation is in common interest of the two nations and people. So it is the solid foundation to transform the IISS into the sea of peace, cooperation, and development. Such basis pave the way for narrowing differences, step-by-step settling dispute, and above all, not allow conflict to happen. I'm confident that China, with its perpetual awareness of big power roles in the region, and evidently is launching its initiative of building a community of shared destiny. So China should support and join Vietnam and regional countries to turn our shared idea into reality. In so doing and making success, China and Vietnam could contribute and showcase a good model of solving dispute in peaceful atmosphere with partnership spirit and for community responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, at the present time, there are a number of effective ASEAN-led cooperation mechanisms such as East Asia Summit, ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN Marine Forum, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, and ASEAN Defense Minister Meeting Plus or 18 Plus, and other dialogue fora such as this Shangri-La Dialogue, Beijing Shangshan Forum, Moscow Conference on International Securities, which in all and significantly have managed uncertainty, competition, and prevent conflict. Established in 2010 in Hanoi, the ADM Plus is primarily an important mechanism of defense and cooperation between ASEAN and its external partners countries, providing a venue for defense leaders of member states to exchange and share viewpoints, discuss issues of common concern and interest, seek for common, build confidence and trust to prevent conflicts. At the same time, ADM Plus is also a platform for militaries of member states to work together on practical cooperation, sharing their experience, coordinating their activities, and helping each other in capacity building via expert working groups for nearly a decade. ADM Plus has been able to vindicate and bring into play its effective role in emerging regional security architecture by bonding members, mobilizing collective strength to tackle common challenges, contributing to the maintenance of peace, stability in the region and beyond. So in this regard, it is understandable to see many big powers now are expressing their wishes to join ADM Plus. Such an application for participation should be supported as it matches the goal and suits the trend. As ADM Plus is to commemorate its 10th anniversary, it is also the good time for the member state to take stock of progress and lessons learned, as well as to chart out the future direction for development. In 2020, when Vietnam assumed the ASEAN chairmanship, it is expected that other ADM Plus countries would join hands to develop comprehensive vision for regional defense security cooperation in decades to come, so as for ADM Plus to further elevate its role as an open and inclusive corporation, a centerpiece in generating secure and peaceful environment and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. Ladies and gentlemen, the region of Asia-Pacific is transforming in an uncertain world. Challenges are multiple, while opportunities and potentials are but numerous. Resting upon our soldiers is the responsibility as to whether or not Asia-Pacific could sustain to continue to be the driver for global economic growth, whether it could become a region of peace, stability, and cooperation responsibility, or would depend on our actions today, especially actions to prevent conflict in contested domains. I'm positive confident that with a high sense of community responsibilities, with the willingness and sincerity from all of us in pursuit for promoting dialogue and cooperation, settling disagreement and differences by peace movements in accordance with international law, all the upheavals and existing frictions could not and shall not be able to prevent us from advancing toward achieving the noble goal of peace, stability, prosperity for each and every nation and for the entire region at large. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for those remarks, and in particular for your comments about the prospective code of conduct. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity during the discussion to talk about specific clauses and elements in the code of conduct that still need to be agreed. With that, could I invite, please, Minister of National Defense of Philippines, General Lorenzana. Thank you, sir.
Excellencies, fellow ministers, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am honored to once again attend the Shangri-La Dialogue and exchange views with defense and professionals from all over the Indo-China, the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Let me thank the IISS headed by Dr. John Chipman for inviting me. Let me also extend my sincerest gratitude to the Republic of Singapore for, as always, the legendary hospitality and world-class accommodation. Over the years, the dialogue has become an indispensable platform for discussing in great detail and with untrammeled enthusiasm, as well as collectively shaping with unparalleled commitment the future of peace and prosperity in the region. And in times of upheaval and tensions, it is precisely forums of this kind that not only serve as a chief register of regional geopolitical temperature, but also spell the difference between collectively espousing a path of diplomacy and peace instead of conflict and confrontation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed living in interesting times. We are witnessing a seismic geopolitical shift that is changing the very fabric of international relations in the 21st century. And with change, especially of this magnitude and with such speed, come new challenges and consequently responsibilities. Let's be clear, each and every nation has a shared and unquestionable responsibility in preserving peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. The former Singaporean Prime Minister and legendary statesman Lee Kuan Yew once observed, the size of China's displacement of the world balance is such that the world must find a new balance. It is not possible to pretend that this is just another big player. This is the biggest player in the history of the world. And true to his prophetic words, the reemergence of China as a major global player, most especially in our region, is transforming the texture and trajectory of geopolitics beyond our wildest imagination. As Harvard professor Graham Allison succinctly put, never before in history of mankind has a nation risen so far and so fast. What we are dealing with is not only a shift in the material balance of forces in our region, but also in our very conception of the emerging regional order, and respectively the anchors of peace and prosperity in the 21st century. The consequence of such seismic geopolitical shift is a troubling form of superpower rivalry, which has now extended to the anxiety of many in the region, even to the realm of trade, investment, and cyberspace. If left unchecked, this new and perilous dynamic could potentially upset globalization as we know it. With the unsettling of our networks on economic interdependence comes growing risk of confrontation that could even lead to war. Our greatest fear, therefore, is the possibility of sleepwalking into another international conflict like World War I. If there is anything that modern history has taught us, is that war can happen even when no one desires it or finds it undesirable. As Barbara Tuchman explained in her seminal book, The Guns of August, where she skillfully chronicles the unlikely origins of World War I, great power conflict takes place in the midst of crisis, where nothing is as clear or as certain as it appears in hindsight. She clearly highlighted the dangers of complacently in human reason, namely underestimating the ability of even the best leaders and sharpest strategists to miscalculate and misperceive each other's intentions. Thus, it is of paramount importance that we, as the principal actors in the Indo-Pacific region, do our best to manage tensions, avoid conflict, and reduce the chance of reckless miscalculation. And this is where it's crucial for us, all of us, to continue institutionalizing, upgrading, and expanding a whole range of confidence-building measures, which could help major powers find an optimal set of mechanisms for conflict avoidance. War benefits no one. Avoiding it is everyone's shared responsibility. In the view of the Philippines, confidence-building measures should be comprehensive, covering all relevant military, paramilitary, and civilian actors with direct stake in regional peace. This is most especially important in potential flashpoints such as the South and East China Seas, with the risk of miscalculation and unwanted conflict is rising on a daily basis as great powers expand their military footprint and pursue divergent visions. What we should all agree on, however, is that freedom of navigation and overflight in global sea lines of communications is indispensable to regional peace and security. In our view, no single power should exercise unilateral control over vital arteries of global trade, such as the South China Sea. We need to collectively protect, as Prime Minister Lee appropriately mentioned the other night, our global commons. Fortunately, we are not short of good precedents and best practices in our region. The ASEAN, for instance, provides a fruitful and encouraging example of conflict avoidance and peaceful dispute settlement. From the Sabah dispute between Malaysia and the Philippines, and the Ligitan and Sipadan dispute between Malaysia and Indonesia, to the border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand over areas surrounding the Priya Bihar temple, our approach has been uniquely ASEAN-centered. Manage and resolve the disputes through peaceful dialogue, diplomatic negotiations, and fidelity to international law and regional norms and principles. Instead of conflict, we have opted for various confidence-building measures and cooperative mechanisms to resolve our disputes and address our shared concerns. Think of the Malaysia-Thailand Joint Development Area in the Gulf of Thailand, which has allowed both nations to peacefully manage their overlapping maritime claims, or the multilateral Malacca Strait Sea Patrol, or the Philippines and Indonesian consensus to settle their maritime border dispute in the overlapping EEZ in the Mindanao and Celebes Seas. The ASEAN, a disparate grouping of among the most diverse nations, stands as a proud and enduring example of willful, sincere, and successful interstate conflict management, which has and should serve as an inspiration across the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. In the South China Sea, where the Philippines is a claimant state, we espouse a dialogue-based, peaceful, and multilateral approach which takes the interests of all relevant players into consideration in accordance with international law and regional norms and principles. As the ASEAN-China country coordinator, the Philippines believes that China, as well as other claimant states, should finalize a robust, mutually beneficial, and inclusive code of conduct in the South China Sea, which would protect the interest of all claimants, as well as preserve freedom of navigation and overflight. In more concrete terms, we should consider joint exploration activities as well as environmental protection regimes, which ensures the equitable, just, and lawful exploration, usage, sharing of hydrocarbon reserves, and preservation and protection of marine resources. While bilateral dialogue is essential to maintaining peaceful relations among competing claimant states, particularly between China and the ASEAN claimants, the South China Sea disputes are an international concern given the centrality of the body of waters to global trade. Yet our concerns should go beyond conflict management. We should also focus on ways to expand avenues for sustained and effective cooperation. The Indo-Pacific is the new pivot of global geopolitics. It's where the future of the international order will likely be decided. This mega region, however, is also a cauldron of unimaginably complex challenges, which will transcend the capabilities and strategic imagination of any single power or any limited grouping of nations. Ladies and gentlemen, the future is rife with potentially bedeviling challenges which would require interstate cooperation on an unprecedented scale. Conflict is not only self-destructive, but also a dangerous distraction from the gathering storm over the horizon. Over the next few decades, if not earlier, the Indo-Pacific region confronts the twin challenges of accelerated climate change and disruptive technological innovation, which could potentially overturn the regional security architecture. In particular, climate change could turn into an almost existential threat to many nations across the MEGA region. According to a recent IISS study, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Oman are among the top 10 most vulnerable nations to the adverse impact of climate change. My country, the Philippines, is surely battered by powerful typhoons, which destroy countless homes, large swaths of farmlands, and threaten the lives of millions. Earlier this decade, the island of Samar was severely devastated by Super Typhoon Haiyan, the most powerful of its kind in almost a century. Meanwhile, rising sea levels are threatening the very existence of island nations in the Indian Ocean and South Pacific. Megacities such as Calcutta, Jakarta, and Manila may also have to relocate millions of the residents in the coming decades as seawater level rises. By the end of the century, rising temperature in turn will affect farm productivity and marine life across the Indo-Pacific, threatening the food supply of hundreds of millions of people, while rendering large parts of West and South Asia unproductive, if not uninhabitable. This is why in the Philippines, disaster response and mitigation management have become a major component of our national security doctrine and international engagements. And with climate change comes the risk of heightened resource competition, both domestically and internationally, especially over areas of overlapping continental and maritime territorial claims. The advent of the fourth industrial revolution and advanced artificial intelligence could also present new challenges, such as disruptions of the labor sector with potentially adverse socio-political consequences. According to a recent study by the International Labor Organization, as many as 137 million jobs, mostly in lower-skilled sectors, are at risk as a result of full automation in the coming decades. The impact will be most felt in Southeast Asia, a hub of lower-level added manufacturing. While new technological innovations bring new opportunities, they could also be socially disruptive. After all, it's in times of bewildering change that extremist ideologies, including religious fundamentalism, gain ground with potentially deadly consequences. The challenges ahead are certainly daunting, but as Thomas Hobart Malthus advised, evil exists in the world not to create despair, but activity. We are not to patiently submit to it, but to exert ourselves to avoid it. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to end my remarks by stating that there is no guaranteed formula to address these above-mentioned mega challenges over the near horizon. Yet we have the shared responsibility to transcend our narrow differences and the competitive geopolitics of the moment, and instead devise a new blueprint of regional cooperation in order to cope with shared challenges as well as uphold common interest in the most effective and inclusive ways possible. What is clear is that great power rivalry is a dangerous distraction from the coming storm. But if we continue to closely collaborate and cooperate, we may very well overcome these existential challenges and along the way create a more inclusive, nimble, and robust security architecture, one that is upheld by the collective effort of every nation, no matter their size, resources, and creed. And rest assured, the Philippines is committed to be a good partner in all this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Lorenzana. I took away from your impressive statement three things. First, I note your assessment that the risk of miscalculation over rising tensions in the region is increasing. Second, your assertion that no single power should exercise unilateral control over vital arteries of international trade. And finally, your reminder, of course, that climate change is both a human security challenge and a deeper strategic one, and an issue that perhaps we should in future integrate more fully into these Shangri-La Dialogue discussions. So thank you very much for that. Senator Reynolds of Australia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. And thank you, John, for your very warm welcome here today. It's wonderful to be here for my first Shangri-La Dialogue as Australia's Defence Minister, and also to be joined in this panel sessions by General Lick and also Secretary Lorenzana. And I thank you both for your very insightful insights this morning, but I'd also thank you for your very personal welcome to me as the Defence Minister. And thank you also to Singapore for hosting this dialogue, and Minister Ng for your hospitality, your wisdom, and your sense of humour. Delegates, occupying what can be a very harsh, isolating land, Australians have always implicitly understood the value of friendship, of loyalty, and also of cooperation. Australia is a nation where the ethos of mateship is deeply ingrained. Mateship is about building and maintaining our personal connections, and it's also about trust. Events like the Shangri-La Dialogue provide an invaluable opportunity for us all to re-establish and renew existing connections and to develop new ones. Over the past few days in Singapore, I've caught up with colleagues who I've met through different stages of my own professional career. People like Dame Meg Taylor, MBE, who I first met at a polling booth in Goroka in the Papua New Guinea highlands when I was an election observer. Admiral Philip Davidson, who I engaged with during my time as Chair of the Australia's Parliament's Defence Subcommittee. Mena Rawlings, who I developed a very close relationship with when she was the UK High Commissioner to Australia. And also Senior Colonel Zhao, who is here today, who I studied with for 12 months on a senior strategic studies course at the Australian Defence Staff College in Canberra, with many other senior military officers from right round the world. But mateship isn't just about connections and about trust. It's also about giving others a fair go. Australians, we like to speak frankly. We value honesty, and we also embrace rules. Because rules, established rules, mean fairness. They deliver stability, and they also create trust. As Prime Minister Lee pointed out to us, it is trust that is critical to ensuring continued peace and stability in our region. That is what Australia offers to our neighbours and to the world. We are a country of 25 million people. We know who we are, you know who we are, and Australians act on the basis of who we are. Today, that is an asset in a region which is at the centre of a profound transformation of global economic and political influence. The Indo-Pacific is becoming more prosperous, but it is also becoming more complex and contested. We are currently seeing the return of old challenges and the emergence of new ones. Major power rivalries, trade, investment and infrastructure being used as tools to build strategic influence. North Korea's dangerous nuclear missile activities. Challenges to international law and norms, including in the South China Sea. And growing security threats such as terrorism, cyber warfare, and climate change. And growing threats and all of these will shape our region in the years ahead. And some of them have, to date, already eroded the hard-won rules and norms that have for so long underpinned the region's stability and also the region's prosperity. This should concern each and every one of us here. Now is a time when we must be clear about the kind of Indo-Pacific we want and collectively and wholeheartedly work towards it. Now, we won't always agree. On some issues, we will diverge. That is expected and natural. As Acting Secretary Shanahan said in his speech yesterday, competition does not mean conflict. And competition isn't something that should be feared, so long as everybody plays by internationally established rules. But we must also continue to find these common principles that unite us, that common sense of purpose. I believe the emergence of Indo-Pacific visions and concepts with similar principles should give us all a cause for optimism. Australia's Indo-Pacific vision reflects our national character and also our very unique sensibilities. We want a region that is open and inclusive, respectful of sovereignty, where disputes are resolved peacefully and without force or coercion. We want a region where open market facilitates the free flow of trade, of capital and of ideas, and on where economic and security ties are being continually strengthened. We want an Indo-Pacific that has an ASEAN at heart and is underpinned by the rule of law, with the rights of all states being protected. Australia's vision is also one that includes a fully engaged United States. For 70 years, US leadership in the region has supported economic growth and promoted the norms and also the principles that have created greater security and prosperity. It is in everyone's interest that this type of engagement continues. And as it does, we also want to see China helping to shape peace and stability in the region, with other powers like Japan, India, and Indonesia playing important roles. At the heart of Australia's Indo-Pacific vision is the confidence that both greater prosperity and security are this region's future. To realise it, all countries will need to work together to take more deliberate collective action. We must use a common blueprint. It's not about being bound by the past. It is about building on the past and reflecting on the realities of today. Sustaining and strengthening shared rules, norms, and institutions is vital. This is how we can prevent conflict and address security threats and economic challenges that are too big and too complex for any one country to deal with alone. Of course, building takes time, if it is done well, that is. It requires investment, it requires commitment, it demands ongoing maintenance, and it is worth the effort. Australia understands that. We have displayed our commitment to this region over many decades and proven ourselves an enduring and a reliable partner. Australia has always been there to support our friends and our neighbours, our mates. There was our leadership of the multinational mission to restore order in the Solomon Islands, our partnering with ASEAN members, Indonesia, Thailand and Laos among them, to support their responses to tragic natural disasters, cooperating with Malaysia on the search efforts for MH370, and working with the Philippines to help defeat terrorists in its southern provinces. Of course, Australia also understands that hard-won gains are sadly easily undone. No country can bank on its past or assume its own future. Right now, we are in the midst of an effort to take our relationship with the Pacific neighbours to a new level. Australia wants to do our bit to ensure the Pacific region is resilient and it is stable. Our efforts now go well beyond what Australia has done in the past. We have a package of initiatives that are far-reaching in scope and also in ambition. Security, economic, diplomatic, development and people-to-people initiatives that build on long and historic relationships and friendships. There are, of course, the traditional military-to-military activities. Earlier this year, Australian sailors and soldiers visited many parts of the region. They travelled to Papua New Guinea, to the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Tonga and Tuvalu to train with other forces, and also, most importantly, to get to know the communities. We are also focused on helping to build infrastructure and doing it in partnership based on what is needed, what is wanted, and also what is valued. Together with our neighbours, we are delivering high-quality infrastructure that is built to last. Our planned major projects in Fiji, PNG and also Vanuatu will boost the capability of the Pacific and also the interoperability of our forces. And this sits alongside our efforts to build maritime capabilities. To date, Australia has gifted 2 brand new Guardian-class patrol boats, one to PNG and the other to Tuvalu. A further 19 will be delivered to 12 Pacific Island countries and Timor-Leste in the coming years. So delegates, that gives you a sense of what is happening in the Pacific. There is, and there will be, more to come. But what is important to remember is that Australia is in it for the long haul. After all, this region is our immediate neighbourhood. This is how we approach our defence relationships with Southeast Asia too. Australia is a long-standing partner. We listen to Southeast Asian perspectives and we work together on challenges. Australia remains one of the few countries to conduct strategic defence dialogues with all countries across Southeast Asia, and our defence engagement budget is $22 million Australian. Delegates, training and education also remain a priority for us. Annually, we offer close to 1,000 positions for military officers from Southeast Asia to come to Australia to build closer bonds and mutual understanding through training and study. We also conduct almost 50 bilateral, minilateral and multilateral exercises each and every year. These grow in sophistication and complexity as security challenges are evolving. We're also stepping up on our maritime cooperation in areas such as maritime domain awareness and combating illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing. And Australia is helping to boost regional peacekeeping capabilities in Southeast Asia. And in practice, this means specialised English language training for a UN setting, co-hosting a multinational desktop exercise, Perak Jabiru, with Thailand, and providing strategic airlift for Vietnam's peacekeeping employments to South Sudan. And on that last point, let me congratulate General Lick on his country's historic moment, sir. So Australia works from a solid base. We want to do more, and we will do more, as the example of exercise Indo-Pacific Endeavour demonstrates. This annual series is Australia's flagship maritime activity, now in its 3rd year. It is another tangible display of our desire to deepen our engagement with regional security forces. It brings together our partners so we can undertake activities like disaster assistance planning, naval manoeuvres and security training serials to build joint capabilities and also to create invaluable people-to-people links. In 2017, the first Indo-Pacific Endeavour focused on Southeast Asia. Last year it was the Pacific, and this year it was the Indian Ocean region, visiting Sri Lanka and then India for Australia's biannual naval activity, AUSINDEX. Other ports visited and activities took place in Indonesia, in Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and right here in Singapore. Of course, Singapore welcomed Australia while also hosting IMDEX Asia 2019, which was an impressive feat. And I again offer my sincere thanks for Singapore's and always, as always, gracious hospitality. I should also mention that Indo-Pacific Endeavour and AUSINDEX are part of a broader engagement across the Indian Ocean. Australia has one of the Indian Ocean's largest coastlines. We also have extensive exclusive economic zones, and the largest search and rescue zone in the Indian Ocean, nearly 53 million square kilometres. We understand the Indian Ocean is vital, as the whole Indo-Pacific region is vital to Australia's security. We want to build a web of regional cooperation and are pursuing new and innovative ways of achieving this. For example, naval vessels from Australia, France, Japan and the United States recently completed the first iteration of La Pérouse, the French-led maritime exercise in the Indian Ocean. And as Australia continues to support complex search and rescue missions, we also, a great example of that was the search and rescue for MH370. There was also the case last September when HMAS Ballarat and a P-8 aircraft worked closely with Indian and French assets to rescue an Indian sailor who was lost 1,800 nautical miles off Australia's western coast. We also continue to participate in the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium because we believe, and we believe it strongly, in supporting the Indian Ocean's maritime architecture. Delegates, Australia is clearly committed to being an enduring partner across the region. And we underscore this by participating in forums and in dialogues such as this one and many others. The ASEAN Defence Minister Meeting Plus, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, and various sub-regional groupings. From Australia's viewpoint, these all remain vital opportunities to plan and explore complexities, to strengthen our regional architecture. But delegates, we also do not forget ourselves either. Australia is very conscious that we cannot simply be an enduring partner. We must also be a credible one. Alongside our enhanced efforts in other domains, over the next decade, the Australian government is investing billions of dollars into expanding our defence capabilities. We will have a more potent and agile Australian Defence Force. Our maritime power will be regenerated, and we will have an expanded defence industrial and also export capability. We want to be as valuable to our partners as they are to us. That is important. Conflict can happen at any time. But strong relationships, agreed rules and norms, and effective institutions can help lessen and even prevent it. The Indo-Pacific is a complex region, we all know that. Its challenges are great. We know that mateship, like trust, is earned over time. But if we work together, we can build this trust and we can deliver on a vision of a region that is secure and is stable. One underpinned by rules and norms that benefit us all. A region, in short, that continues to prosper. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, and I now look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Reynolds, and for beginning your speech, also for reintroducing into the strategic debate those three magic words of trust, rules, and norms, for the detail you gave about the prominence you're giving in Australia to your Pacific policy and your relations with a variety of Pacific island states. I noted that sort of geoeconomic thread in your speech as well, where you remarked that your development policy is based on what is wanted and needed, and it was also useful for all of us to understand the specificity of the place of the Indian Ocean also in Australia's defence policy. So we have had an extraordinary introduction to this session that has inspired, according to my computer, 13 interventions already. I'll take the majority of those over the next 10 or 12 minutes and then return to the panel, and we'll try to close at about 11:15. And I'll give priority to a few of the people who have sought the floor before and who I haven't been able to bring in. So on that basis, could I first invite our old friend from Japan, Masa Nishihara.
Very much for these opportunities. We have heard both from Vietnam and the Philippines today that they do favor the importance of peace and stability of the sea lanes in South China Seas, and also societies, and also the freedom of navigation in the areas. I suppose that Vietnam and the Philippines and other ASEAN countries support the U.S. operations in the region, and along with the UK and France. I also participate in this, excuse me, not I, but these countries also participate in the more indirect, excuse me, I was going to say Japan also participated in this endeavor in the indirect manner by supporting the ties, improving closer ties with Vietnam and the Philippines. May I ask whether this is sufficient for these ASEAN countries to promote the free navigations? They do not really express usually in the public, but I hope they do, I suppose they do support, but they do not express, and this is also weakens our position. If we can make, if the ASEAN can make a strong statement in supporting the freedom of navigation operations by UK, France, United States, Australia, and other countries, this will help the balance of force in the region.
Thank you very much, Masa. We've got to move on. We've got that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Viraj Solanki.
Thank you, John. My question is for Minister Reynolds from Australia. The latest meeting of the Australia, India, US, Japan consultations at senior official level, also known as the Quad, took place 2 days ago. I'd be grateful if you could discuss how you see the future of the Quad as a mechanism to enhance regional security in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you. Rommel Banloy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chipman. I would have wanted to ask this question to General Wei, but I think the three speakers are in the position to answer. General Wei said that there is a progress now on the negotiation of the conduct of party in the South China Sea, and I would like to know if you share that kind of sentiment. And can you identify what areas that we can see some progress in the negotiation? And related to that, China set a timeline for the conclusion of the COC, which is in 3 years' time. Do you agree with that timeline? Are you optimistic that COC will be concluded in 3 years' time? I have a specific question to General Leach, but I think Senator Reynolds can also weigh in. The Philippines and China made an agreement on the joint development of natural gas and oil in the South China Sea. What is Vietnam's reaction on that? And also Australia, what is your reaction on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Ashley Townsend.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. My question is for all of the panelists. The topic of this session is preventing conflict in contested domains. Over the last 5 years, one of the main ways that regional countries have tried to achieve this is through confidence-building measures, particularly in the maritime domain. They have worked to a certain degree to limit crises on the water and in the air, but they haven't done much to change the way that the strategic environment has deteriorated, particularly in the South China Sea. Could I ask the panel to comment on whether those sorts of rules to prevent strategic change are no longer effective, particularly as the US, Australia and others are now talking a lot more about deterrence as a better means to ensure stability and prevent conflict? Thank you.
Thank you. And from Indonesia, Dewi Fortuna Anwar.
Thank you very much. My questions will be mostly addressed to the two ministers from ASEAN. We have heard this morning about this very uncompromising position from the ministers of defense from China which clearly states that the South China Sea is territory, and that also that China reserves the right to use force if necessary. Now, if we look at the ASEAN countries, I imagine that all the claimant states, including Vietnam and Philippines, will also not budge an inch about your respective claims. But ASEAN has developed a culture of renouncing force in settling disputes, and both of you have reiterated how ASEAN have resolved territorial disputes between member states. Now, going back to the COC, how confident are we in ASEAN? Is it possible that ASEAN members would be able to mesh these different strategic cultures, the one that say reserve the rights to use force, and the other say renouncing the use of force? To what extent would ASEAN be able to ensure that the substance of the COC will meet the kind of code of conduct that will match the TAC? And how do we ensure that the COC, when it does come to being, will not actually institutionalize very, very asymmetrical relationship in which, in the long run, it will be to the detrimental, not just of ASEAN members, but also the wider stakeholders in the South China Sea, including, not really paying sufficient attention to all of the clauses and UNCLOS.
Thanks, Dewi. Janet Dia.
Yes, thank you, Janet from Indonesia. My question is especially for General Lich. I want to remind you of the incident between Vietnam and Indonesia in April 2019, where one of your fishery ship rammed our warship that was having one of Vietnam's fishing vessel. There are opinions. Some believe that the incident is quite a copy of what the Chinese also has done in Indonesia in 2016. I just want to know how your views are on that, and how should we manage this incident and, of course, managing it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben Bland.
Yeah, my question is for Secretary Lorenzana about the Mutual Defense Treaty. Earlier this year, the US Secretary of State Pompeo tried to reassure the Philippines that the US would come to your aid in the event of an attack. But you've said that his reassurances were not enough. So what further measures do you want to see the US take? And what statements would you like to see them make to reassure you that they will, in fact, come to your aid if there's a conflict with China or anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you. Koi Shaki.
About the rules-based order and the importance of norms. And I'd be interested whether there are any of the current rules or norms that you would like to see changed. The Chinese talk a lot about the need to accommodate China's differences and new rules. Do any of the three panelists have rules or norms they would like to see changed in the current order?
Amy King.
Happily, my question was exactly the same as Corey Sheikh, so I'll just reiterate, and particularly for Minister Reynolds, are there any changed norms or new norms that you would see as being particularly important to achieve the collective blueprint that you talk about?
Well, asking a question twice makes question avoidance a greater challenge for the panelists. So we'll make certain that that question of rules and norms is answered. Lin Kwok.
Thank you. General Lick, in July 2017, a little after a year after the South China Sea Tribunal Award, China reportedly threatened Vietnam with military action if it continued to drill for oil and gas in its own exclusive economic zone. Vietnam is said to have ceased operations. Similar threats were apparently issued in March and May 2018. Can you please tell us first whether there is any truth to these reports? And second, if the reports are true about these threats, why didn't Vietnam say anything? Can we infer from that that Vietnam has caved to China? And to Major General Lorenzana, you mentioned joint exploration or development. Will joint exploration concede that China has legitimate claims in the areas that will be jointly developed? Thank you.
Thank you. Marvin Salazar.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. My question is directed to the good senator from Australia. I just want to get your reaction on China's own security concern in South China Sea. General Wei had said it himself. The islands in the area are part of their territories, thus providing a reason for China to deploy its military facilities. He even said that this is just a mere self-defense and that it is simply addressing a pressing security threat, particularly from actors that blatantly show muscle in the area. So my question is, given this reality, how do you intend to advance and reconcile your own version of freedom of navigation and rules-based order and uphold the internationally established norms and rules in this highly contested area? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I'll come back to the panel to give them a couple of minutes each to respond to all the questions, and then we'll close the plenary. And when I come back to the panel, I'll ask General Licht first, then Secretary Lorenzana, then Senator Reynolds. So you have your advance warning as to when you're on, as it were. 2 more questions then. First from Zhongying Pang. Wait. Zhongying Pang? Yeah, don't turn off your microphone.
Defense Minister, and you and the U.S. Acting Defense Secretary mentioned the keywords inclusive Indo-Pacific strategy. Do you think is it possible or just so-called defense diplomatic words? And my second question is about how to include China. Is there a roadmap to include China in the Indo-Pacific strategy? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the final question from Yoichiro Kato.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chipman. Li Shenlong talked about the possibility and danger of U.S.-China strategic face-off. And having listened to the presentations and discussion over the last 2 days, I come to believe that such a development is not something that we can just regard as unreality. And my question is to 3 ministers, how do you assess the impact of such strategic face-off between China and the United States on your strategic interests? And what would be the alternative strategic choice and adjustment your country would and should have to make to deal with such a development? Thank you.
Splendid. Thank you very much. So we will now return back to the panel, and I'll give them each a couple of minutes to respond, and we'll close then for the coffee break just before 11:15. General Licht of Vietnam.
First of all, I welcome colleagues that raised the questions to all 3 of us. First of all, freedom of navigation and overflight. I tend to think that all countries are legitimate to exercise the right in navigation's freedom and navigation of overflight, but the important is we must to uphold international law with specific laws on the seas, for example, UNCLOS, with the principles of respect for national sovereignty and independence of littoral nations and responsible activities and contribution to the development of the regions. For Vietnam, we strictly uphold international law. It is not only in our words, but in our activities, and exercise the full right over to the freedom of navigation and overfly. We are ready to work with countries to settle disputes on the equal basis in accordance with international law and suit our conditions. With regard to the questions on COC, ladies and gentlemen, the fully implementations of DOC, especially with regard to preserve the status quo and the negotiation toward a meaningful COC, is something both China and ASEAN is exerting our maximum effort. And we would like to maximize our effort to reach the early conclusion of the COCs within the timeline of 3 years and even less than 3 years. So you have heard this, and in our conversations, General Wei also raised these issues with me. So with our responsibility for the peace and stability in the region, I would say that ASEAN is now making effort, and China needs to make a bigger role and effort. So with the willingness and effort from the two sides, we can reach a meaningful conclusion of COC as we all are pleased and expected. Now for the questions on the incident happening between Vietnam and Indonesia. First, I would like to say that both Vietnam and Indonesia are investigating and also in working together in demarking the marine border between our two countries. So fishing vessels working in this area, we would say there could be some infringements, if you may say. So because demarcation has just not finished, which area belongs to Vietnam, which area belongs to Indonesia is not clear. So that is why there could be some confusions. For Vietnam, we are exercising our effort in, first of all, educating our people to uphold the laws and especially regulations on fishing lines. I work with and I talk with my counterpart in Indonesia and also my counterparts in Vietnam, and I stress that yes, fishermen, if they violate some rules or some rights, we need above all exercise the humanitarian approach to them, because fishermen are basically poor. Humanitarian is above all for both Indonesia and Vietnam. Yeah, I think that's enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you. On the question about the FONOPS, I think the question is, does ASEAN support the FONOPS, and is it sufficient action to keep the South China Sea free and open? I think, yes, we support the FONOPS to keep the South China Sea free and open. And is it sufficient in the long run? I don't think it's not sufficient, because we had to get the cooperation of China to keep the South China Sea free and open in the long run. On the COC timeline, I think China last year said that they want the COC to be finished in 3 years' time. So I think almost 1 year has elapsed, and I think we have 2 more years to finish that. And we believe, the Philippines believe that that is to the advantage of everybody if the COC is finally finished. That will address all the concerns of all people or claimants there or players. There was a question about the confidence building measures that we have in place in the past. Are they still effective? We believe that they are still effective, but we should explore more avenues or measures to strengthen some more of these confidence building measures. On China's uncompromising stand in the South China Sea, we get conflicting message there. They have this uncompromising stand that it is their territory, but they also renounce force. I keep telling the Chinese ambassador in Manila that the Philippines has 2 documents to prove that we have sovereignty over the area. The UNCLOS of 1981, which China is a signatory, plus the arbitral ruling in 2016. And they have they claim they have it is their territory because of historical records which does not exist. On the MDT, I was the one who raised this issue, I think sometime last year or the other year, because we would like to remove some of the ambiguities in the treaty, which was signed in 1951 at the height of the Cold War. And we believe that we have to revisit it just to be sure that it is still relevant in these modern times. There's a question about accommodation of China's role. Yes, China's role in the South China Sea is very much welcome, but it should also display a lot of some sort of a responsible major power and not using might to force its way in the South China Sea. Joint exploration of the South China Sea. There's a question about joint exploration if our agreement to a joint exploration will give the Chinese jurisdiction over the area. No, we don't. In fact, the prevailing sentiment of our negotiators is that we could go into joint exploration, but let us not talk about sovereignty or jurisdiction. Impact of the face-off of China and the US, it concerns us in the Philippines because we are smack there right in the center of South China Sea. Anything that they do, if there is a conflict, if there is a shooting war, we are involved. If the trade war continues, then we are affected. So it impacts us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all of the delegates for your questions. I have now spent 75% of my time as the Australian Defence Minister here, involved in the very rich discussions that we've had on bilateral and multilateral basis. And what it has reaffirmed to me is that the principles and the values that underpin Australia's vision for the Indo-Pacific, I think, are the right ones for us to continue on with. And I'd like to share with you those principles and values because I think they in a large part answer the questions that have been asked directly of me. So Australia's vision for an open, inclusive and prosperous and stable Indo-Pacific. And it's one where disputes are resolved peacefully in accordance with international law and without the threat or use of force or of coercion. Our vision is also about open markets that facilitate greater economic integration. The right of freedom of navigation and overflight are upheld. The rights of small states are protected. The US remains strongly engaged in the economic and security affairs of the region and continues to help shape institutions and norms. And that China plays a leading role in the way that we strengthen those principles. And I'd also say in relation to the code, we believe it needs to be done in accordance with international law, including UNCLOS, and not to prejudice the right of other ASEAN members. And you could say that would be a very important measure which would help set appropriate norms and minimise the risk of conflict in direct response to those two questions. So I think that as I move forward and return home to Australia now, these discussions and the input and the questions too today provide very good guidance for me in terms of how this government proceeds to further implement our vision for the Indo-Pacific. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and I hope everyone in the hall will thank our three ministers for a tremendous presentation and excellent conversation. Everyone has now earned a well-deserved coffee break and will return to the hall in 20 minutes for the concluding plenary. Thank you very much.